Okay, so why don't we launch into it? For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mike Toffel, one of the town meeting members here in Precinct 8. We have 14 of our 15 Precinct 8 town meeting members are here, and thank you to the rest of you for joining us. The purpose of this meeting is to give you a brief overview of what's coming down the pike in town meeting and to hear your perspectives on those issues and also on anything else you wanted to share with us as your town meeting members. So I've put in the chat the agenda for the evening and also the names and email addresses of your 15 town meeting members. So you can copy and paste that to a secure location if you like. And we will just get started. And Bob, can you give us the intro to Zoom?
Sure, thank you. So I'm just going to share a screen here and briefly go through. Some of us are all too familiar with Zoom. So, but just in case some of us are not all that familiar, some quick instructions. So if you go, Zoom's a little bit weird in that sometimes this bar down on the bottom doesn't show up unless you go down towards the bottom of your Zoom screen and then it shows up. But in the, and it may vary if you're using an iPad or a phone or something, but on a computer, I think it generally looks like this. There's a microphone in the bottom left corner, which if you click it, will have a red bar across it like this camera does. And that means that you're muted. And if you can please mute unless you're called on to speak, that keeps stray ringtones, dogs barking, children screaming, fire engines from interfering. Okay, this is really kind of the key to being called on. Down along this same bar, there's a participants icon. If you click on that, it's going to bring up a list of the participants, and at the bottom of the list, there will be a raise hand icon. So let me just quickly show you that again. If you go to the bottom of the Zoom screen and this bar will come up, you click on the participants, it will bring up a list of participants. On the bottom of that list on the left is a raise hand. And if you'd use that, it's much easier because there's multiple screens sometimes. We can't see everybody. And it also keeps track of the order in which people have raised their hands. So it's very handy, pun intended. Okay, and the way you know that your hand is raised is in the participant window next to your name, there will be a little blue hand showing that you have in fact accomplished this incredible feat of raising your hand. And one last thing is there's a chat icon down here as well. We'll do our very best to monitor the chat, but that's where you can say wonderful things about how much you're impressed by your town meeting members. So with that, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. I will paste a link to this into the chat in case people love it and wanna review it, but I'm gonna turn it back to Mike.
Great, thank you, Bob. Okay, so we're gonna ask Anne now to give a brief intro to town meeting and all the warrant articles that we're actually gonna face.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I'm Anne Greenwald, for those of you who don't know me, a town meeting member from Precinct 8, and just want to also welcome you to this forum. And I will share in the chat after I finish speaking a link a little list that I made of resources where you can look into the town meeting handbook, the town meeting website, and how you can participate in town meeting this year and or watch it. So that'll be in the chat after I'm finished. I wanted to give a brief overview of town meeting. Brookline has 240 town meeting members that are elected, 15 from each of the 16 precincts. Town meeting members are elected for 3-year terms. We are the legislative body of the government in Brookline. Tonight, we're here to represent you, well, to hear what you want to tell us as we represent you in town meeting next week specifically about the warrants that are being presented. So annual town meeting is usually in May, but this year it's in June because that they needed time to prepare for a virtual town meeting on Zoom. So what town meeting consists of is a warrant, and the warrant is made up of warrant articles. And a warrant article is an item of business that's brought to town meeting. It may be developed by the select board or by residents or by town meeting members. And the warrant articles are what make up the agenda for town meeting. So at town meeting, each warrant is presented and discussed before a vote takes place. This year, a limited number of warrant articles are being considered due to our virtual meeting. And we are in a time of three major crises: a pandemic, a major economic downturn, and a racial justice uprising. The current situation affects us in Brookline and needs to be taken into consideration as we consider the warrant articles. The warrant articles that aren't addressed in June will be addressed in November. So I'm going to go through the list of the warrant articles that will be addressed, and I'm going to leave out, as I go through them, you'll see some of them are things that happen annually. And the first three, I think, are of that nature. So warrant Article 3 is what's called a compensating balance agreement between the town and a bank. And it's, as I said, it's mandated to be renewed annually. And it just means that the depositor, as in the town, maintains a specified level of non-interest payments, and in return, the bank agrees to perform certain services for the depositor, which is the town. That's usually just a very straightforward thing that we just renew every year. The next one is a warrant Article 5, and that's to allow that outstanding bills from the previous year be paid. And again, pretty straightforward. Article 6, another annual warrant article, is that an increase of property tax exemptions for certain classes that are mandated by the state, which includes surviving spouses, several categories of veterans, blind and elderly citizens. Brookline plans to give the maximum amount of exemption possible. This is also usually just passed without any discussion. Article 7 is probably going to be deferred until November, and the school committee has voted that they will approve it being deferred till November, and it's about allocating additional funds needed for the high school renovations. Article 8 is the budget, and we are going to discuss this in greater detail. I'm not going to go into it now. That needs to be passed in June and then confirmed, I think. I don't know exactly what the word is, in November. And Articles 9 through 15 are about the proposed development of the Newbury College site. This includes multiple components that are going to be talked about together, but each voted on separately. The components are basically zoning changes that the developer is asking for, affordable housing alternatives, and the potential purchase by the town of a parcel of the property. And again, these are going to be discussed in greater detail tonight. Articles 18 and 19 are both related to affordable housing. 18 is to establish the Brookline Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which will provide for the creation and preservation of affordable housing in Brookline. 19 is an amendment to the town's bylaws related to the Housing Advisory Board. And basically, the amendment includes changing the board to add an 8th person. It was a 7-person board that includes a select board member, creating 2-year terms of service instead of 3 years, and deleting the term upper moderate income and using the terms low income and moderate income, And finally, adding the responsibility of managing the trust that would be established in Article 18. So those are Articles 18 and 19. And then the last article is Article 25, which is the transfer of 2 unused liquor licenses from the Washington Square area, one to Coolidge Corner and one to Brookline Village. So that is a really brief overview of the warrant that we'll be debating and voting on in the June town meeting. And I will turn that back over to Mike.
Thank you so much, Ann. So that was a thumbnail sketch. We're going to dig in the rest of this meeting, we're going to dig into what we, the town meeting members, think are the meatiest of these, which is the Newbury set of decisions, an Oak Street sale, which we didn't mention yet, and then the budget. And then again, we're going to give lots of time to hear from our constituents. So we're going to give, that was the longest talk that you'll hear tonight from any of us. Everyone else has committed to roughly 90 seconds, with one exception, Ed, yes. Ed gets 120 seconds or something. And so we're going to target the Newbury decisions first. Now, these are 3 separate but related decisions that span warrant articles 9 through 15. So the first set, which is called Decision 1, Kate will talk about. That's like whether or not we should allow the zoning changes that are being sought to be approved. That requires a 2/3 vote, which Kate will talk about. Then the next one, I'll just give a thumbnail sketch. The next one is about what, if presuming that that goes through, where does the money that they will donate or dedicate for affordable housing go? Does it go on site or does it go for a project off site? And Amanda will brief us on that. And then finally, the last Newbury Decision 3 is about the west parcel, which is a subset of the land, is being offered to the town to purchase. And the question is whether town meeting should agree to have it go to the voters on a referendum or not. And Ed will take the yes position and Kate will take the no position on that. Okay, so without further ado, Kate, if you can talk through Newbury Decision 1, which is warrant articles 9 through 12.
Sure. Kate Poverman. I live on Adams Street. As a little bit of background, and most of you are probably familiar with this, Newbury College went out of business last year and the property came up for sale. The town bid for it, but was outbid by a developer, Welltower, who plans to put a senior living development there that would consist of 160 units comprising independent living, assisted living, and a memory unit. In order to do this, it needs a zoning change because the area of where Newbury is zoned for single family housing. So that's why it's coming to town meeting, is to get the zoning change so that it can actually build its project. Zoning committee was formed and there was a lot of negotiations, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the benefits that the town cites as existing for this transaction or agreeing to the zoning change are that a tax agreement has been entered into for 95 years, which ensures that taxes will be paid at the appropriate amount, i.e. residential for the property and then some real commercial taxes in perpetuity, well, for 95 years, so that even if the property is switched to a nonprofit entity that does not usually pay taxes, Welltower will continue to pay taxes to the town. Currently, there are no assisted living, especially an upscale one in the Brookline, Boston area. Well, obviously there are some assisted living. So it is thought that this would actually be a benefit to the town. The area, as you can see some models of what the buildings would look like. The area, if you're not exactly sure where Newbury is, is, let's see, we're scrolling there, up on Fisher Hill between Fisher Ave and Hillsop. And well, anyway, you can see it's there. The annual taxes to the town will be about $800,000 a year. Right now, we don't get any because the Newbury was an educational institution that was exempt from having to pay it. The estimated income to the town over the next 2 years from building permits is 1.5 million. The developer has agreed to maintain an existing historic house, the Mitten House. It will be donating money to the senior center annually and will allow part of the premises to be used by the community at least 12 times a year. Now, there's disagreement as to whether or not the town has exacted a sufficiently beneficial deal from Welltower. One part of it is the purchase of the West Campus and the purchase price, which I'll get into in a little bit. My personal position is that we had very sophisticated investors, negotiators. We had experts that we hired to help us. It does add something to the neighborhood, to Brookline, and it is a decent way to use the property. That's my thumbnail sketch.
Great. So I think it's fair to say from our meeting yesterday, when the town meeting members met just privately, there was general enthusiasm for the project. And I wanted to, at this point, open it up to our constituents to see if you have any questions so that we can make sure we use this time most wisely to answer your questions. So if you would use your raise hand feature, or you can type into the chat, which I'll also keep an eye on if you can't figure out that raise hand thing. It's also possible that we don't have questions, but I'll pause for 30 seconds to see if any questions arise. This is going to be a much faster meeting. So Ed's mentioning in the chat, Fisher Hill Association favored the project. That's the kind of the local neighborhood association surrounding the property. Oh, Melissa. Yes, Melissa, question from you.
I do have a question. I believe that Welltower is making a $2,500 donation to the senior center annually.
Yes.
And I assume that this use 12 times a year, that may or may not be senior center use. This is just some information from you all. $2,500 seems like a very small amount to me. So I guess I have two questions. I guess the negotiators felt that it was a very reasonable amount because very few people in Welltower will use the senior center. So that's the first thing. How did you all respond to that? And the second thing is, if it does turn out to seem to be too small because of a lot of, I don't know, senior center use, do you renegotiate something like that? How does that work?
If what turns out to be too small? Oh, the amount?
The amount. If it seems small, because for example, let's say that we discover that Brookline has to set up transportation back and forth between the senior center and Welltower or something like that. Just a.
It's not a bad question. I mean, my personal view when I saw the $2,500 amount was like, yeah, that's all. But I was not involved in the negotiations, so I really can't comment on that. Maybe the rationale for the $2,500 was to allow transportation back and forth. I'm just speaking out of my hat here because I just don't know. I would say theoretically everything's subject to renegotiation, but I wouldn't count on it.
Okay.
Well, if I could just add, Melissa, I mean, the other piece is that the estimated tax revenue from the project is something in the order of $800,000 per year.
Right.
And so, I mean, there's no telling where that money will be allocated, but if the demands on the senior center increase as a result of the project, it seems to me they'll have a pretty good rationale to seek additional funding to advisory, who would then have to recommend it in the budget. But there is a lot more money coming to the town.
Yes, I would have thought so too. And then we had this pandemic. And so the budget looks a little different, but I will keep that in mind because it will be a while before it ramps up. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Great, thank you, Melissa. Let's see, any other hands? I think there's no other hands. You're kind of like we were. We were like, sounds pretty good. Okay, so with no other hands, let me encourage us to move on. There was a question by Jim Perrin about affordable housing, which is our next topic. So warrant Article 13, Newbury Decision 2. Amanda, take it away.
Fantastic. I think David is currently scrolling down for a little bit, but maybe what we'll do is I'll start sharing my screen and then we'll go back to talking about the two different options, if that is okay with you guys.
Sure.
All right, and let's try to, promise I can work this. Okay, so I just wanted to give a brief background on inclusionary zoning. As part of any large development, we have a rule in town that says 15% of the units must be affordable. So what does that actually mean for this project based on the scale of it? It means 18 bedrooms.
Actually, 18 units.
18 units. They're all 1 bedrooms, so that's what we're getting at. If you look in our town bylaws, the inclusionary zoning rules prioritize on-site as the highest priority. Next is on an adjacent site, and last is a cash payment into the housing trust. And the main reason for this is that inclusionary zoning is based on equity. We want to allow affordable units to be built alongside with market rate units so that there's no economic segregation in the town. In practice, what this means is buildings that are, say, 10 units and smaller tend to pay into the housing trust, and buildings that are larger than that tend to build on-site units. But that's not always the case, as you'll see here. So basically, we have 2 options. A vote in favor of warrant Article 13 is for the Holland Road option, and a vote against it is for Colonel Floyd. So what do these look like? Holland Road is 18 units on an adjacent site. It's about half a mile from a T-stop. These are home ownership units. They're 80 to 150% AMI. Generally speaking, that's workforce housing, so people who can't afford to live here based on market rate values, but not incredibly low income. And using this option would mean we expand the geographic footprint of our affordable housing stock. And then the last point on this is that it's not age restricted. The counterpoint to this is a project that the Brookline Housing Authority has put together, which is to renovate an existing low-income project in Coolidge Corner called Colonel Floyd. What this means is the current state of this building, there are 60 senior units currently in a walk-up building, which is not usually synonymous with aging in place. And so what they want to do is tear down those 60 units and build 40 more. In order to do this, they're going to bring in money in addition to what Welltower is giving them, and actually end up tying 30 Section 8 vouchers to the project, which has pros and cons. It means that we'll actually build more units, but it also, if we think of it in terms of the number of households that are helped, we're thinking 10 new households helped. These are rental properties and they address a lower income population, and they are age restricted. And depending on who you ask, whether it's someone at the Housing Authority or members for our Housing Advisory Board, this may or may not happen without this payment. And maybe I'll stop sharing if David wants to show the two options of what they look like. But essentially what we're being asked to do is weigh competing priorities.
You got it?
Yep.
Okay.
Can you narrate what we're seeing?
Oh, you want me to do? Okay, this is the Holland Road option with the 18 units. You have an existing house here. There was talk that to get 18 units, there would have to be an addition built, which you see on the right. There's also the option of tearing the entire building down and building a brand new building. It's adjacent to the Newbury campus. So that would be one option that the town would have if they vote yes on 13. The other option is the Colonel Floyd apartments, and these are two views of the current state of the Colonel Floyd units. They're dilapidated. They're not handicapped accessible. They really need a whole lot of work, and we would not only renovate the existing buildings, but we'd get 40 more units. So there seems to be a big consensus to vote for the Colonel Floyd option. So those are to give you a visual idea of what we're talking about.
Great, thank you. Amanda, do you see the question in the chat? Could you address that?
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. Age restricted means senior. So the Colonel Floyd property is a current senior property with a small percentage reserved for those living with disabilities. The Holland Road option would allow basically anyone to live there. It is a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units, with most of them being 1 bedroom. Thanks for the question, Ellen.
Thank you, Amanda and David Marc. So any other questions? This is one where it's not such a slam dunk for some people. So, we are also interested in your opinion as to thinking about the trade-offs between them. Let me just zip over here, sorry. Arden, we'll start with you. You're muted, Arden.
Yep, thank you. Sorry about that. Can you see me?
Yeah, hello.
Hello. So I agree with you all. I think voting no on Holland Road in order to vote yes on Colonel Floyd is the right idea. But what happens to that Holland Road project if it doesn't pass? What are they going to use that building for? What's the plan B?
Great question. Amanda or David Marc?
As far as I know, there's no constraints on it. They may decide to develop it themselves, but I doubt that they will based on what their expertise is. And then the alternative would be to sell it off, although David might know more than I do on that front.
No, you're absolutely right, Amanda. They'll probably sell it to a private owner.
A private owner. Okay.
Great.
Gotcha.
I'm gonna continue to prioritize our guests. So Jim or Ellen, whoever you are, hiding behind the James Perrin label.
So it sounds like the Colonel Floyd option basically maintains segregation.
No, the other option, Holland Road.
Because Holland Road then has no affordable housing and no affordable housing in Fisher Hill area. Is that correct?
That is correct. There is, I think, one affordable housing building in Fisher Hill currently that is not associated with this project. But if we're thinking about the reasons for inclusionary zoning, building up within Coolidge Corner is not really the same as being on site or on an adjacent site.
Yeah, makes sense. Unfortunately, it makes sense. I mean, I think it would be great to have more affordable housing spread across Brookline rather than saying there are areas where we can have affordable housing and other areas where we can't.
That is the key trade-off, Jim. You've hit the nail on the hammer there. So Maura, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to know if the cash payment that would go into the town housing trust for the Colonel Floyd, is that, the contribution from the town, has that been affected by the budget?
So the town is not supposed to be putting money into it. What they're trying to do is take the money from the developer and combine it with state and federal funds in order to renovate all of these units and replace them. So right. It's not currently thought that the town is going to be adding additional money to this.
Or I'm just wondering about any contribution to any of these projects because of our current state of, affairs because of the virus. I'm just wondering if this whole thing is going to be turned upside down because of that funding.
I think it's hard to predict whether state and federal funding is going to change and what it will look like. But it's definitely a good question.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great. John.
Yes, I thank you. I just wanted to respond to Jim Perrin's question, the idea of segregation of affordable housing. The counter argument on that is that the Holland Road site is kind of at the top, or well, just below the top of Fisher Hill. There are no, kind of amenities such as supermarkets, et cetera, nearby. And so really it's a car, somebody pretty much would have to have a car to live there, whether in affordable housing or not. In contrast, the Colonel Floyd apartment complex is very close to the heart of Coolidge Corner. There's the Stop and Shop supermarket, there's the post office, the Coolidge Corner library, all the other shops in Coolidge Corner. So it's very definitely a walkable place. And in terms of affordability, transportation affordability, Colonel Floyd, I would think would be much preferable. Thank you.
Thanks, John. So Jim, do you care to respond? Because that's also been a key issue from my perspective, the availability of amenities and mass transit in particular, which is what influences my decision.
I thought Amanda showed something about distance to the local T. It's not that far. It's just down the hill a bit, I thought.
No, it's half a mile.
No, that's all. I mean, that's easy walking. I've done it. I've walked that particular spot. So, I mean, I know it's actually very accessible to the T. I don't remember, John, if there are stores, and I don't remember that part of town well enough to know if there are stores and supermarkets nearby. I don't think it's that far from the Stop and Shop, but it's probably not less than a mile.
It's at least a mile, probably more. Plus, getting to the T isn't so bad. It's getting back up to the apartments that could be a problem for anybody with bad knees or
right.
something like that.
Well, it might then, I mean, with all due respect to seniors like ourselves, it might select out younger people to rejuvenate Brookline.
Good. Thank you, Jim. Anne, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you. Well, I also wondered if there was any way to secure transportation, like a bus route that went closer, because I also think that could be an issue for the seniors at Welltower, since we can presume that not all of them are going to be immobile. Many of them will be participants in the community. So that was one thing I was wondering about. And the other is, in all these discussions, we're always talking about 1 bedroom or possibly 2 bedroom. And I really wonder about units that are larger, 2 to 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms, where children, where families can move in, and where we can have again, a more diverse population. And my question also is that Colonel Floyd, with the 10 additional units, do those have to be age exclusionary, or could it be mixed?
So they're technically building 40 units. It's just 10 new households being served. There is a certain percentage of the property that is reserved for those living with disabilities. The rest of it is age restricted. And they're going to continue with that division with the new ones. I think it's 20% with those living with disability, but someone can correct me if you remember better than I do.
And then can you respond to Anne's first point about I believe that the Welltower is providing transportation for their residents.
In Teslas.
In Teslas, right. That's going to be hard to make an argument for buses if they have Teslas.
It is. But there is movement. I know in some of the Housing Advisory Board discussions, they were talking about, well, maybe what you could do with the Holland Road property is have fewer units with more bedrooms, because then you might actually cater towards families that were trying to help make a home here. But I think right now it's all 1 and 2 bedroom.
Okay, great. Thanks. Tracy.
Yeah, Amanda or anyone that knows, it looks, from the pictures, it looks like the Colonel Floyd apartments are in use right now. And so when someone asked and someone said that it would get sold, like, how would that happen if people are already living in there?
So the one that will get sold is Holland Road, not Colonel Floyd, but Colonel Floyd will need to be torn down and rebuilt. And the BHA has said that they will try to relocate the current residents to other BHA properties during that process. They don't seem to be that worried about it. I don't know enough about what that process looks like to see whether there is cause to worry outside of what they've stated.
All right. Thanks.
Great. So I don't see any other hands. Ed, did you want to get a sense of the community's take on this one? Ed, you were...
Yes, in the last time we did this, we asked people who were not town meeting members to vote one way or another as to whether they were in favor of each of the articles. We're up to 13 now. And that helps us understand whether your opinions are kind of consistent with our own opinions. So the idea would be that folks that aren't town meeting members, maybe we could do a virtual vote up or down on 13.
Sure. So let me explain. Thank you, Ed. So you get to practice being a slightly confused town meeting member, although I will say with a much kinder moderator. So the choice you have is this article says if you vote yes, it's a vote for the Holland Road property, the adjacent development. If you vote no, it cancels that, and it means the money will go into the trust fund and then be deployed to the Floyd property. So yes for Holland, no for Floyd. And right in that participant list, if you click on the participants button, as was shown earlier, next to the raise hand thing, there's a yes and no. So you can vote right now. And we always get like 60 seconds with a countdown clock, and it's all very nervous. And you're like, what did he say? And we have expressions like you all do right now going, where's that button? So you'll see a yes and a no. So if you think we should vote yes for Holland or no for Floyd.
And this is not the non-town meeting members.
That's right, the non-town meeting members, right? We can see who you are, so I'm making sure people behave. You have about 10 more seconds on my invisible clock to vote. And I'm seeing so far 1 yes and 5 no's, which is roughly consistent with your town meeting membership representatives. All right, we are representative. Who knew? All right, so thank you for voting. I'm going to clear your votes. It was 1 to 6 was the final tally of that little straw poll exercise. But I know those of you who haven't voted yet are going to really step in to vote for the next one, which is even harder. Thank you, Jonathan. Jonathan writes, "We do not feel we understand the issue well enough to vote." That is, if you can get town meeting members to be honest outside of Precinct 8, there's probably a third of them who agree with you. Oh, and the parents should get 2 votes. That's true. Good point. Good point, Ellen. Sorry. Okay, adjusted tally, 6 to 2. Okay, so now we're going to get on to, I think, is fair to say, besides the budget, is the most contentious issue, at least amongst town meeting members in our precinct, because there's really good arguments on both sides of this one. Okay, so this is what's called Newbury Decision 3 in our agenda. This is about whether town meeting should agree to bring to the voters the opportunity to purchase the west parcel or not, in which case the developer has the right to sell it. And there's some more details that we'll explain as we go. All right, so on the yes side, 90 seconds from, or sorry, I think he said 3 minutes from Ed, because he didn't realize I had imposed the time limit. So Ed, just unmute yourself, and I think you should be able to share your screen. So this is Ed for the yes side, and then we'll hear Kate for the no side, and then we'll love your feedback, the rest.
Ed, are you going to give a general overview of what exactly is involved with the 3.1?
That's why he gets extra time. Yeah, he gets extra time
Okay,
because
got
he's
it.
going to represent, in an unbiased manner, he's going to represent the decision, and then he's going to put on his debate hat and tell you why.
Got it. Okay.
That's what I was promised.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we're good.
Can you see the screen?
Yes.
I think that I am just going to do it not in a formal presentation, but do it like this. There's something called stop share up here if you wish to consider. This is warrant article 14 and 15, decision 3. And it's the purchase the West Campus at Newbury. Let me just say one thing from the report. The town will never be in a position to find property like this in the foreseeable future.
Okay, that's advocating. That's advocating.
I'm going to mix the two
Just
together.
spell it out.
I'm going to mix the two together. I prepared this in advance. I apologize, Kate, but it's not a big deal. So what would Brookline be getting? This is the Newbury College area in red. This is the West Campus. Here's another view of West Campus. It's 3.13 acres, and it includes an academic center, which is currently usable. It also includes the West Hall, which will be put in mothballs. Here is also space for 150 cars, and it is adjacent to the Fisher Hill Reservoir Park, which is 10 acres, making a nice little parcel, which I will come back to. The academic center is really in quite nice shape. Here are various views of it from the outside. Here are views on the inside. It is very potentially usable. What could it be used for? Well, first off, a land use committee will decide that. In the short term, the basement would be used for building department workshops. The current space is inadequate. First floor for municipal training, etc. The current space is inadequate. Second floor, less clear. Long term, this could be used for municipal schoolhouse spaces, senior space, affordable housing. There's lots of other possibilities with renovations, and probably in the back of all of our minds is, could this be the 9th school site? And I want to just remind you of the following for perspective. The Driscoll School, Lawrence School, about 50,000 square foot footprint, 5 and 6 acres respectively. That's what a 50,000 square foot footprint would look like in this space. And remember that it's adjacent to public land that we already have. What's the cost of this? This is going to require a debt exclusion vote sometime this year for about $15 million. Again, for perspective, the Driscoll School project is $115 million. So this is a land for a school, potentially. The yearly debt service on that at 3% is that. 3% is the usual experience in recent times. That would amount to $49 a year for a single family home owner in Brookline. There are the dollar amounts for condominium and commercial property. If it was 4%, which we don't expect, those are the values, not too much higher. I want to mention that there's going to be a tax loss. There's going to be maintenance costs per year. And when you put that in, it might amount for a single family home owner to $60 a year. And on the advocacy side, I think that's a pittance for what we get with this property. What has the vote been so far on this matter? The advisory board subcommittee voted in favor 6-0. The advisory board itself voted separately on warrant article 14 and 15. I don't understand this vote, but for 15 is 26 in favor, 3 opposed, 2 abstentions. I don't know what the select board vote is. And that is my presentation. Sorry to take so long.
Great. No, that was pretty zippy for the complicated story. Thank you so much. And Kate, taking the no position.
Okay. My view of this acquisition may well be different if we were in different economic times, but the fact is we're not. Things are really, really difficult now, and the town is trying to eke out every penny it can to prevent layoffs of personnel, whether that's in the police, the school, the town, all sorts of other places. So numbers that may not be significant in more robust years can be significant in these times. So some of the problems I have with acquiring this property now is that the long-term use is not set. It's not really clear what the plan would be. There would have to be significant studies, expert hired, entailing other expenses, et cetera, in order to determine what the highest and best use of the property is. And as Ed said, currently the annual cost of maintaining the property is $73,000. And we'd lose $140,000 in tax revenues. So it would have an impact annually to the town of $213,000. Again, not huge numbers usually, but right now, that's a couple of people back on the salary. If we don't purchase it, there is another option. The property is available to us for $14.8 million. If we don't buy it, Welltower can sell it to a third party. If it sells for more than $14.8 million, it will split the profit over $14.8 million with the town. So I actually did the numbers for 18 million with a $3.2 million profit, and it's split between the town, and we'd get about $1.6 million. As Ed referred to, it would involve an override. And yes, the individual hit to us as homeowners would be relatively minimal. The problem is there are other overrides coming on down the pike. $13 or $14 million is not much when compared to the amounts that were requested for last year's overrides for the schools, one of which failed. But we have multiple other things that are coming up, such as renovation of our fire department, which apparently I'm told by David Marc is coming down the line at about 35 million for next year. So, you know, it's a difficult situation. Yes, it is a parcel that's unusual. It's unusual for it to be available, but I think that economically right now, it just doesn't make sense for us to go for it.
Great, thank you, Kate, and thank you, Ed. David Marc, just as a point of information, I wonder if you could share, to the best that you know, what are these other capital expenses that might require overrides in the next, say, 5 years?
Okay, well, we have a lot of overrides that we're going to be paying for years. We just finished paying off the last high school override, which passed in 1994. That went for 25 years, and we just finished that. We have Runkle, and we have the school operating overrides, which we passed, one for the town. We had the devotion override at about 150 million. We had the high school override at 200 million, and we just passed the Driscoll override. So those 3 projects alone, Driscoll, devotion, and the high school, that's $500 million in debt right there. Coming in the pike, we have a fire station renovation, which we can't really afford to put in the CIP. The average age of the fire stations in Brookline is about 94, 96 years old. There's talk about whether to renovate Station 5 in our precinct or completely rebuild it. So that's going to be anywhere between 25 and 40 million, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 35, which will come as an override next year. Also, Pierce, the Pierce School will be somewhere between 200 and 300 million on top of that. We are getting some funding from the MSEB, and that's maybe 25% of the costs, but that's going to be on the table next year as well. We also are probably going to need a school and town override for just basic operating costs because, as BFAC said, it's really unsustainable, and we're going to need overrides every couple of years to keep up with just the normal operating part of the budget. So my view is that we can only go to the override well so many times. Every time we've had an override, the margin of victory, so to speak, has gone down. It's become more and more narrow. And at some point, the voters are going to just say, we can't afford anymore. There are a lot of people in Brookline who really cannot afford more money in overrides. And it's the point where we're forcing people to move out of town because they can't afford to live in town. So that has to be a factor in our decision. I would rather see that parcel put on the tax rolls and with taxes coming into the town, rather than just sitting there as a property where we don't know what to do with it in years and years. Whether they're going to use it for storage, whether they're going to use it for office space, I would prefer to see it on the tax rolls, and that's just my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Just to be clear though, just again, point of information here. If they sell it to a nonprofit, for example, then it would not be on the tax rolls, right? So it's not 100%, it'll be on the tax rolls.
That's the potential. Right now it's zoned for single family. So there will be a limit, unless they do a 40B, there'll be a limit on what they can do on the property. They would probably ask for a zoning change, in which case the town has some leverage in, just like with the well tower, to get some tax money in return.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Great. So let me again turn it over to our community members here who may have questions or comments to share on this decision. I think you've gotten a taste of the trade-offs that we're facing. Again, remember that town meeting's vote is not to purchase it because we don't have the authority. It would go to, we would vote, if we vote yes, it would go to the community for a vote. I think it's September, if I'm not wrong.
September 1st, I think.
Yeah, September 1st. So that's what we're facing. We're facing the question of, should we let it go to the voters or should we put the kibosh on now? So looking for hands or wavy motions. Either one will do. Or comment in the chat. Normally this is when I cold call my students. Melissa. Oh, you raised your hand, but I think you wanted to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yes. I just have a why would you not just go ahead and send it to the voters and let them decide? That's my first question. The second question is, when you think about this property, what do you think of when you say short term? How many years do you think? When you say long term, what are you thinking? So those are my two questions.
Terrific. So let me try and get some new voices in to try and answer that. Bob, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, so let me take a crack at the why not bring it to the voters, which, you know, in some ways I think, you know, you're right. Why not let voters weigh in on it? I think that the answer to that, there's probably two answers. One is that, you know, there's a certain cost to bringing anything to the voters in terms of, you know, providing information, getting the word out there, you know, promoting it. And then the other piece is that, at least from my point of view, I'd be a little hesitant to do it prematurely if we're still in so much uncertainty economically on September 1st, because are we going to need some sort of an override in order to keep, you know, other things flowing in the town, in which case, you know, we might want to wait until May to do an override where we could, you know, cover that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks. I just want to acknowledge a comment in the chat that Larry Hardoon says, these once-in-a-lifetime opportunities are usually few and far between. Let the people vote. So that's his perspective. I think similar to Melissa's question. Anyone else want to weigh in?
Can you all answer the long-term, short-term?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Question, just approximately.
I think David Marc would be the best one, don't you? Oh, not
Sure.
David. Yeah, David Marc. Jeez.
David Marc, yeah. He's unmuting.
Sorry, I was on mute. I think I'm off now.
Yes, you're good.
Okay. Right now, the town does not have any definitive purpose for this. Usually when we go to the voters, we say, hey, we need this piece of property for a school, for a firehouse, something like that. There's talk that maybe we'll use part of it for storage because some town departments want some storage space. We might use it for additional office space. We're going to mothball one of the properties. The property that was going to be mothballed, which you saw in the prior presentation, needs a lot of work. It needs a new roof. There's substantial water damage to most of the building. So at some point we will probably tear it down. So the cost of renovating that building would be over $1 million probably. So there are a lot of long-term costs in buying that property which are not evident right away. There'll also be, I think, $150,000 in renovation costs to the existing school building. There'll be some maintenance costs for the property as a whole. So without a definite use of what we're going to do with it, it's just going to sit there for years. We don't know. And in this time, when the budget is taking such a hit, can we go to the voters and ask them to just approve override after override after override? It seems like priority, for at least for me, fixing the fire stations is a much higher priority as far as asking the voters for a tax override. Those are in deplorable conditions. We're asking our town employees, our first responders, to live in those conditions. So my priority would be the fire stations first and Pierce, and then see, you know, if the voters have enough appetite for another override to get that property after that. But
it's possible to wait. It's possible to wait that long to make the decision.
No. I don't think that's what he's saying. I think like we either just, we're going to decide now, and if we decide not to purchase it, if we vote no, or subsequently if the community votes no, the developer has announced that it intends to sell it.
Yeah. Okay.
So that space would be gone. Now there's a question in the chat that says, would it be possible to put a museum or cultural development there? I'm not sure if this is Katha Seidman. I'm not sure if you're meaning, could that person purchase the property from Well Tower? I don't know if that would require a zoning change. I think, David Marc, you're just saying it's residential only.
It depends on whether it's a for-profit or a non-profit. Depends on what the use is.
Okay.
I don't think the town is in a position to build something cultural there, though I don't think that's in possible thought balloons.
I wasn't thinking that they would be, that the town would do that. I was thinking what would happen at some point when the town decided that it didn't have a specific use, whether in the meantime there would be some opportunity to find the funding and make that happen because the town owned it. So the town might want to participate in some part. It could, you know, put that piece together.
Well, you mean rent it out or lease it out to another group?
Whatever. I mean, I don't know what, you know, but just as a possibility.
Yeah, that could certainly happen.
I have the dream of having the New England Slavery Museum be in Brookline. That it would be a really interesting museum to have. New England enslavement has not been explored in the same way as a lot of other of that nature, and I think it would be helpful in just the conversation about Black Lives Matter, for example, to have that be something that people could go to and learn more about.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, John, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to address the idea that it was expressed that possibly the academic center might be vacant for a long period of time. No way. Ed actually in his slides he described there are many town offices, many town departments that actually have their eye on different floors of them already. And I wouldn't be surprised if the town did buy the property that kind of the very next week, the renovations would begin and then those departments would begin moving in for the short-term uses. Part of that, also a very important consideration in that, is that the town already pays several $100,000s of dollars. David Marc may know the exact figure in rent to rent other properties because current town office space, et cetera, is not big enough to encompass everything. And then in terms of medium term or longer term use, Ed, once again, in his slides, I think they were in Ed's slides, basically the notion of there's a dozen at least uses that were brought up both in town meeting during the earlier resolution of a year ago, inquiring about buying the property, and then other ideas that, the same ideas actually that have come up since, things like a satellite senior center, things like, as Ed mentioned, a possible 9th school. There are just multiple uses that the town could put those buildings to, both immediately in the medium term and in the long term. I don't think we have to worry that it would really be vacant for a minute, really, if the town did decide to purchase it. Thank you.
Great, thank you, John.
Wait, let me ask, I have no idea if let me ask David Marc a question. So when you said that the academic center would be closed for a while, my understanding is you were talking about the building that is in extreme disrepair, not the one which has classrooms and things in it, which would have to be renovated to be usable, but not at such a large expense. Is that correct?
It's the house in the back, the house that needs all the renovation. That's the one with the water damage, needs a new roof, and there's a lot of rot in the windows and so on and so forth. The academic building was recently renovated. It has Wi-Fi in it. It has a state-of-the-art library that we saw when we took the tour. But we have not heard a clear view from Town Hall as to what they were going to use it for. And that remains to be seen of what the cost for that will be.
My understanding is that's
Wait
an
a minute.
overflow from the sanitation department, which is currently in
You already closed, I have to defer them.
What's
So
that?
what David is saying is not true.
So
But there
hang
is-
on, let me encourage us to go back to the hand raising process. I see Ed, but I see John, but I just want to just regain some decorum here, folks. And I think we're only going to let people speak 3 times before I make sure everyone else, because remember, the purpose of this meeting is not exclusively to hear town meeting members debate each other. That will happen in due course. It is meant primarily to get feedback from our constituents. So let me also remind us all of that. So Ed, with all that caveats, your brief remarks are what?
Well, first off, that the academic building is in very good shape now. The amount of renovation that would have to go on there would be minimal. They already have a purpose for the basement and the first floor. And as John mentioned a few minutes ago, it's hard to imagine that they won't find uses for that other useful space in short order. In terms of the long-term use, that is going to depend upon the decision that is made. And some of the long-term uses could be approached very quickly, and others would be, of course, more difficult. You'd have to look at the full details, 2 years in some cases and 10 years in another. This is a long-term view of having space that adds to existing space for what I see, if you sell it right, as not that expensive. We're talking about a single family dwelling paying $60 more per year to have this space in for use possibly in the future. And boy, don't we wish we had this space.
Ed, so I want to give other people new opportunities to get their voices in. Okay.
I just want to finish the sentence by saying, don't we wish we had that space back when we were worried about thinking about the Baldwin School?
Oh, please.
Kate, I'm going to mute you, Kate. Barbara, we're with you.
I want to just speak about it for school use. At one point in time, we had thought about possibly building a school using the area that Newbury is buying. The plans that we saw were considerably larger and wouldn't fit so well on that space. Now, that being said, what I would say is, we also talked about, and if we had much more crowding in the schools, and we don't know really where that's going in the future, you could build a kindergarten school. You could also use it for a beep classroom. Currently, we are putting several beep classes in the Clark Road rented property. We don't know whether that will be available for renting after, I think we have a 5-year lease on it at this point, in which case we will have to have some facility for that. We could, there are all kinds of things. There could be high school uses for it. None of this would happen, I think, in the short term. But I also want to talk about its general use for office space. Our town government has been growing, and while some people groan and say that shouldn't happen, in fact, I have not seen too many people who are thinking they don't have much work to do and we could let them go. I know certainly in the school department, though people keep saying cut the administration, our people are very busy doing many things and not doing everything that we could be doing. So I think we need to think about the costs that we will spend renting property, as we were paying. I don't know what we were paying for Webster Street. We're not renting that anymore. We've moved some of those people into the Pierce School Sperber Center, but it was quite expensive to rent that Webster Street property. So David Marc probably knows. I think that I am on the side that says the town will find any number of uses for that property over the years. And I personally think it would be unwise to sell it. Or to
You mean to not buy it, actually.
Not buy it, right.
Okay, we'll talk about selling in the next article. Right. Okay, so I am going to, in the interest of time, call the question, which is to say, I'm going to ask our constituents once again to vote how they would like. So I just remind you what the yes and no is. So yes means bring it to a ballot measure, and so that the voters can decide, and whether they want to take the debt and assume the operating costs, and perhaps by then the town will do a better job marketing what its proposed near-term and long-term options are, or vote no, which is to say we should not bring it to the voters and let Welltower sell it. Okay, so yes means bring it to the voters, no means don't. Your little reminding you, if you go to the participants, and then the little yes no buckets are in the bottom. They encourage you to vote. Jim and Ellen, if you disagree, Jim and Ellen, it looks like they might be, then Jim and Ellen, if you guys disagree, it's a little hard to figure out, maybe just don't vote, because they'll cancel each other out, and that'll be okay. But if you do agree, then just go ahead and vote, and I'll count you twice. Trying to figure out how this all works. Doing math in my head here. Okay, so they voted yes. Okay, so it is unanimous, 10-0. Wanted to go to the voters. So that's a very clear signal on an issue that was somewhat contentious among us. So thank you very much. It's helpful, certainly to me. I'll speak for myself. Okay, great. So we are moving on now. A much briefer discussion. This is a fairly quick one on Oak Street. So Barbara, can you talk about this one? This is warrant article 16, for which is not in the combined reports, because the town moderator was suggesting this, among many others, to not discuss in this meeting and to wait for the fall or a subsequent meeting. But we know that someone's going to move to include this in this meeting, and I suspect it will get passed to discuss it. And so, Barbara, if you can talk briefly about what this is.
Yes, I can do that. The Oak Street property was bought when we were planning a new school on the Baldwin site. The property consists of 3 condos, which are adjacent to the open space, the Sewell. It's the Sewell Park area that surrounds the school. The school has its own property, but it is right next to Sewell. If it is demolished, these condos would have added extra area for play space and other school uses. The override failed, so we decided to use the Oak Street building for office space because we were ending the lease on Webster Street, and those were largely school department offices. However, it turned out that the zoning restrictions would not allow those to be used for offices. One of the things had to do with the fact that you have to have handicapped accessible offices. So we would have had to put in an elevator. Excuse me?
No, sorry.
I can't take what she's saying. Last spring at town meeting, we discussed selling this property, but the majority felt that town-owned property, particularly property that was near a school and would increase the open space if that were used, the majority felt that we should keep it and use it for other town needs, which we have done. This year, the town is again considering the sale of the property because at this point, our finances are very, very strained. And the sale would eliminate our payments on the bonds that we had to take out to get this property, and ultimately add cash for our being the town budget, not the schools. I can't tell you the exact amounts of money we're talking about because there was no write-up, and I threw away last year's town meeting stuff, and I don't have it in the amount of money in my school records. So it would be, we would gain some money, save some money, and gain some money by selling it. On the other hand, again, you are selling property that would be very potentially useful in the future. The Baldwin School will continue to be used. We really don't know what's going to happen in the future, and you're selling property that could be used by tearing it down and adding to our open space.
Great, thank you so much, Barbara.
David may know the money figures.
No, he's shaking his head now. So in the interest of time, because I want to get to the budget, let me go right to our constituents and see if you have any questions or comments. Again, either chat or raise your hand in the participant list if anyone wants to weigh in. Melissa.
I'll be quick, but I wondered when I read about this, if there was any point in holding on to this land because of the possibility of creating some affordable housing in the future. And I don't know if the space is big enough but anyway, that was really just all I wanted to mention. It seemed to me we ought to think about this whenever some kind of opportunity comes up. Thanks.
These are literally 3 condominiums, and it is a space that would have added, but it's not enough to build anything other than 3 condominiums, I think.
So fairly small. Okay.
It's fairly small in terms of what you're talking about. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else? Comments, questions? All right, so let's go to the vote. Again, constituents, this property was purchased primarily to add space to the Baldwin site when we thought it was a potential 9 school site. It's no longer seemingly a potential 9 school site. So the town owns a 3 condo unit. If we sell it, Ed's comment here, it would be about $5 million. Sounds about right for a 3 condo space of that area. So the yes means empower the select board to sell it. I think that's the right language. And no means hang on to it. So let me encourage you to vote. Yes means allow the select board to sell it. No means hang on to it. All right, so it seems like we've got, all right, hey, Carrie, welcome. Okay, so I'm gonna say the parents, I'm presuming they're united since they're voting. So 2, yep. This is tricky. I'm glad no one else is doing that because my math skills can handle 1 voter counting twice, but not more than that. So we have 11 yeses to 2 nos. That is where we are at the moment. So thank you again. That's a fairly clear signal to us, so I appreciate it. Okay, we are moving on to the most exciting part, one of them, I think, which is the budget, which you've read in the press, you've seen on Facebook, but you haven't seen David Marc. So David Marc, to you.
Wow, $1/3 of $1 billion budget in 90 seconds. What could possibly go wrong here? Okay. The budget has changed quite a bit since February. The town administrator releases it in February, and we had hearings. We had it all pretty much set to go, and then COVID ripped everything apart. When we shut down, we not only lost revenue from parking meters and tickets and things like that, we also lost the sales for commercial marijuana, which hurt us a lot. We lost hotel room taxes, meals taxes, things like that. So we took a hit there, and then we looked at a possible $3 million cut in state aid as well. So the budget has still not been finalized. We're going to be hopefully meeting this week on Tuesday and getting a final vote as to where we're at. The town administrator came up with 3 scenarios: a best case scenario, a middle case scenario, and a worst case scenario. In the beginning, it went from, I think it was $8 million cut in the best case scenario to up to $39 million in the worst case scenario. As more data came in and we had an idea of what we could possibly get reimbursed for COVID expenses and things, it got narrowed down. And the town administrator decided to go with the middle of the road estimate, which could change if there's another shutdown with another wave of COVID, or if the reimbursement from the feds doesn't come through, we might need more cuts down the road. Or if we sell even more marijuana, we might be able to add some stuff back to the budget. So the current guess is that we're going to have to reduce expenses by about $12 million. And we've been tinkering with the edges and trying to find places to save. It got down not too long ago where we were asking the schools to cut about $4 million out of their budget, and the town side 3 point something out of their side. And the schools have done an amazing job. They're within $500,000 of meeting their goal, and Barbara can get into that a lot better than I can. On the town side, it's been rough. There are a number of different cuts. The senior center is taking a big cut. Most departments are taking a cut anywhere from 2 to 10%. The largest cut to any town department outside of the schools is the police budget. The police cut is $655,973. A number of the cuts in different departments are either vacant positions, which they're just not going to fill. There were a couple of new positions which the town had originally planned on putting in, which they're just not going to do. Supply budgets have taken a hit, and a number of part-time workers have been furloughed. The library, for example, furloughed all of their part-time workers. Because they're not going to be opening up right away, the full-time staff will basically do the part-timers' job for the foreseeable future. And hopefully when November comes around and we have a better idea of what the final numbers are going to be, we can maybe add some positions back. But again, we don't know. But this is the budget that we're going to be asked to pass now. And then as the months go by, we'll have a better idea of state aid, federal aid, the COVID expenses. I will say that one thing that really is not in this budget is the amount for the COVID, the masks, the gloves, the plexiglass for town departments. The schools are going to have a massive cost when it comes to COVID, and we don't know what that is, and we don't know how it's going to work. So the advisory committee has already given 3 reserve transfers for COVID expenses so far, and there'll probably be a 4th one in the next couple weeks. And we're going to have to figure out what those numbers are going to be in the future. And we've never had a budget that's had so much uncertainty. We haven't had to have cuts like this since I think Prop 2.5 went through back in '82 or '83, sometime before my time. I can give you numbers on if you have specific questions about specific budgets, but that's basically where we're at. All budgets are pretty much taking a hit of some level or not. Most of the budgets are doable because a lot of the spots are vacant, so they're just not going to fill them. But it doesn't mean it's not going to hurt. The senior center, for example, is taking a $70,000 hit, and they have some grant money which they can pay for either some office workers at the senior center or social workers, but they don't have enough money for both, so they're going to have to figure that out. So in 90 seconds, basically, to sum up, it's an ugly budget. So. Anybody have any questions?
Great, thank you, David, Mark. So again, yeah, to the constituents, any questions or suggestions or comments?
Does Barbara want to kick in any comments on the school side?
I can kick in a few comments on the school side. We knew last year that we were going to have a budget deficit, and we worked very hard, and we were doing well, and then COVID came along, and that of course upset everything. We had gotten this down to a reasonable amount, I think, at one point, and then we were given this other cut from the town, and as I'm sure you all know, this resulted in our doing a reduction in force, which we had to do by the end of May, or else we could not hire those teachers next year. Most of that has been rescinded. There are still some positions we don't know, but it's a very difficult situation for the school because we don't know what school looks like next year. We have no idea. The state at this point has said you can only have 10 children in a classroom. That's one of the things that is quite difficult. There are all these requirements about face masks, all of the COVID costs. So we don't even know at this point what we're budgeting for. We have taken, we have rescinded most of the RIF notices, but there may be, it's tricky because people who get RIF notices, if they are certified and have more years with Brookline, they can make other people move. It's just a very, very difficult situation to be in. Can make other people lose their jobs is what I wanted to say. So, you know, I don't know. I think we're in better shape now than we were, but we don't really know where we're going. And there's nothing we can do about that until we know for sure what DESE, the Department of Education in the state, is going to say that we have to do. And it may involve much more work online. For some kids, it may be coming back part of the time and being online in other parts of the time. It's a very difficult situation. So I think although we will vote for a fixed budget, it's not necessarily the final budget. The other thing that I could say here is that, because I was going to mention this, the high school there has been increases in the cost of the high school for a lot of reasons that if you're interested, I can go into. But that we are thinking we might be better off holding until November, because while we have to have a budget now, the final budget comes in November, and we will need some money for the high school, but we don't exactly know how much at this point. And so we might vote, we might be perfectly happy to have people vote to hold that question until November.
Great. Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, David, Marc. So let me again encourage our guests, our precinct constituents, to ask questions or share your comments, if you have any. I'm going to pause, John, before calling on town meeting members. Okay, let's see. Jackson, a question from Jackson. Why does the high school need more money? And Jim Perrin says, so I'm confused. Are there choices here? So can we talk first to Jackson's point? Why does the high school need more money? Barbara, did you want to say something about that?
Yes, I can say quite a bit about that. The budget was originally a very stable, I've got the wrong piece of paper, a very stable budget. We started with 270 to 348 million. We brought it down to 2.6 million in 2018 by value engineering. Then in 2018, there started to be galloping escalation in construction costs. And we were working with the MBTA, and the MBTA has turned out not to be the easiest easiest group to work to, because there are complexities. They needed a different kind of station, which will cost more. There was a track design around the school building. There's a bridge, and the bridge, the train has to go around the bridge, and they were afraid it was going to hit the school building, so the design had to be changed. When they took down the Roberts wing, there was some structural reinforcement to the main building that had deteriorated and will have to be rebuilt, and that costs more. There are unsuitable soils near the MBTA track, which can't support the building structure. I mean, it goes on and on. These are things that you run across when you start to build. And the Davis Footbridge has to be replaced, which has to be done, which is another cost to the town that isn't high school, but it is the path that the kids, the ninth graders, are using to take to the old Lincoln School from the high school. So anyway, and the construction costs continue to go up. So that's why costs have gone up.
Great, thank you, Barbara. So to summarize, costs are rising in the industry, and there's been some unanticipated construction elements that are required. So that's the summary. So the two most recent questions, are there choices here, and what are the choices here? So let me take a first shot at that, and then follow up with more questions, or my fellow town meeting members can add in. So the budget is proposed by advisory. The select board weighs in with any adjustments or comments that they have. And then it's up to town meeting members to either vote the budget as was proposed, or to issue a series of motions to amend the budget. That could be anything from so I should say the schools, what we do for the schools is it's a single line item that town meeting approves. And then the schools department through the school committee sets up their own line items. So they have line items that they manage to, but once town meeting appropriates the money, town meeting has no top line authority. For the town side, these budgets go into line items. They go into capital line items, and they go into departmental line items. So there's an opportunity for town meeting members to say, well, I don't like that we cut this area so much. I think we should cut this other area more and put that money here. So there's an opportunity for town meeting members to propose motions that amend the numbers. So they could amend within the town side, and they could amend town to school allocation. Further, they could propose to take money out of reserves. There's a variety of reserves. The stabilization fund is one of them. Unreserved balance is another. They could vote to change the decisions that are the recommendations that advisory has made about how much the whole pool is. So that, I think, is my attempt to summarize what the decisions are that we face. John, you've been patient with your hand. Is that an active hand or a residual hand?
Yes, no, it is. And very quickly, I just wanted to let everybody know, this is a budget amendment that that the Board of Brookline PACs has approved and is going to submit. And there are several PACs members in the Precinct 8 town meeting constituency. It would be an amendment to the budget. This will not change the dollar amount, but it will put a condition such that if the police department requests any purchase of, quote, riot gear, which means SWAT type equipment, that that purchase must be approved by the select board following at least a 14-day public notice, giving the public lots of opportunity to comment, approve or express its disapproval. Again, this won't change the dollar amount of the budget, but it gives more public access to this very important part, especially in light of the George Floyd situation and Black Lives Matter. So just wanted to let everybody know. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And John, has the town moderator ruled that in order?
To be honest with you, this is a brand new development, and I don't even know if the town moderator quite even knows that it's coming.
So we may or may not vote on it, depending on whether he allows it. Don, do you have a sense, having been in this game for a while, do you have a sense of whether the moderator would allow that type of motion? And you had your hand up for other reasons, perhaps.
Yeah. Let's see, did I unmute myself? Yes. I can't imagine why he wouldn't accept it, but he is the moderator, and I'd have his reasons. Another thing I wanted to say is that since we seem to have we have been moving fairly well, and I don't know if this is in your plan, Mike, but I would love to open it up for constituents to talk about non-town meeting member issues if they so choose. Things that have been going on in the world, COVID, Black Lives Matter, whatever. I would love to hear a more general discussion if people want to do that. Thanks.
Sure. I think we can go to that now, because a lot of those issues actually sometimes have budgetary spillovers. So I welcome your comments more broadly on the budget in particular, or non-budgetary issues as Don requested. So Don, do you have any particular kickoff questions, or just want to leave it open like you did?
One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot recently, of course, is our relationship to our police department, and the calls for reimagining police in Brookline, and the larger national, international context. But again, I would love to hear more from people than from me.
Okay, thank you. I think you might have to cold call people, Don.
Anne raised her hand.
I see Neera. We're going to go with non-town meeting members first. Neera, if we could hear from you, thank you. You are still muted, just Neera, to make sure you know that. Send you an ask to unmute link.
Oh.
There you go. Hi.
Sorry. I guess I want to understand what the process is to make what's the process to make any changes? So if we want to reform the police, if we want to defund, reduce the budget, what the process to bring it to be? Does that make sense?
Sure, yes. Don, you want to tackle this, or you want to delegate this to you? Oh, you just muted yourself. You were unmuted, and now you remuted. Nope, you're still muted, Don. There you go.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, toggled it the wrong way, sorry. One of the locuses for this is the board of the select board. They are, at least in title, police commissioners. I know there have been discussions in recent select board meetings, and including the one coming up, on police issues. If this is something you're interested in, I would certainly encourage you to, you can watch remotely on our local cable stations through BIG, our local cable. I know Ralph Hernandez in particular has been very forthcoming on this issue. And if you want to be involved, I would say the easiest thing to do is to send emails to the whole board or to particular members whose views that you may want to align yourself with. I'm sure there are other ways to get involved, but that's what comes to mind most immediately.
Thanks.
Nina, does that help?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, great. So Hadassah, we haven't heard from you, and then I'll get to Anne next. Hadassah?
Thanks. Contacting the select board is definitely one way to go. There are also a lot of grassroots community organizing going around, especially on Black Lives Matters, racism, transparency, and government. A few off the top of my head are Inclusive Brookline, which is something that I'm more familiar with than others. There's the Bridge, which is Brookline Racial Justice, something with an E, I can't remember what it stands for. So there are a lot of kind of on the ground type of action that's going on. And if you would like to take part, or if anyone would like to take part, you can just leave your email address in the chat, or you can just say, hey, I'm interested, and I can leave my email and we can connect.
Great, thank you so much, Hadassah. Anne?
Yeah, I also wanted to say that Raul Fernandez has actually
container.
Proposed that there be a task force to look at reimagining policing in Brookline. And I think this would be a really powerful way to volunteer or to get involved if you were interested in that topic specifically. And then all the things that Hadassah mentioned, I think are really important as ways to get involved in our community. Were you also asking, Nira, though, about like if you wanted something in the budget to be changed, how would you go about doing it? Because I thought you were also asking that, and I just wanted to say that we can make amendments to the budget. We can propose amendments to the budget, and then they get voted on at town meeting. So like if you saw something, like I saw that there's one thing I noticed was that there's a renovation of Lars Anderson that's being proposed that's $2.2 million. And I wondered if that could be deferred to look at for next year, and that $2.2 million could go to the schools or to some other community services that possibly are more needed right now in this time of austerity. So that's the way that, so proposing an amendment is the way that you do that if you want to change something that's on the docket already. I hope, does that help?
Yeah, thanks.
Great, any other comments, especially from our constituents? Questions or concerns or suggestions? All right, well, seeing none, I'm prepared to conclude unless anyone has any final remarks that they want to provide. Now's your shot. All right, well then let me just, oh, I see, sorry. Okay, Tracy and Bob.
Well, the last time we did this, it was very helpful to just get, even if to get an idea of what, if people like this, and if what we could do differently next time. And I don't mean to put anyone on the spot, but they could email that to any one of us as well.
And that actually goes along well with what I was going to say, which is to thank people for coming and remind them that that our email addresses were pasted in the top of the chat by Mike. So thank you, Mike. Thanks for moderating.
Sure, my pleasure. And we're gonna, this was recorded, so we'll be posting it. I'm gonna talk to my Brookline Interaction Group friends to see if they can post it to their YouTube channel, and then we'll post that link on the Facebook and Google Groups lists. If you're not aware of the Facebook or Google group links, we have one for Precinct 8, a Facebook group that I moderate with Bob, and the Google groups that Hadassah moderates, and I help a little bit on that too. So again, feel free to email us. That's the way that we sort of communicate out with our precinct constituents, and tell your friends. Great. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a good evening. And you can watch town meeting online. It's much more raucous than this. Take care. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.